everybody. My name is Leah Eramo and I currently work for REA as a developer. So my talk is called I Was Framed, Why Learning the Frameworks Does Not Work. I do have to apologise in advance for the clickbaity title, but I wanted some seats filled. So what this talk actually is going to be is a guide to teaching and a guide to learning. So for those of you who aren't junior, how to teach a junior. And for those of you who are junior, how to teach yourself. What this isn't is the only method or a guide to best practice in the workplace. So everyone's opinion can be taken with a grain of salt, as can mine, but I think I'm pretty right. So let's see how we go with this, hey? A little bit about me personally. I'm a major doofus, as you can probably see by that Snapchat video. I was laughing for a good hour about that video. So I love the Beatles more than anything in this world. Maybe my family's just a smidge above, but I love the Beatles and I love disco. I love red velvet ice cream. I would probably murder for some red velvet ice cream, not gonna lie. And I'm a high school dropout, and I find this is very important to tell people because when you're in the IT industry, especially as a developer, people tend to think that you have a degree in comp sci or computer science, and this isn't normally the way for everybody. So what I like to bring this up because some people think, well, I have to go to university, I have to do a computer science degree if I want to be a developer. And here I stand, a living testament against that. I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm not saying that you have to either. So just a little caveat there. So a bit more about me professionally. I started off after leaving year 11. I finished year 11. I did an advanced diploma of multimedia, which I have not used since. I learnt PHP there, and I really wish I had have remembered it because I could be raking in the cash right now. Having said that, we also did a lot of things that I would not be raking in cash for, such as Flash development. This was back when Macromedia Flash wasn't old. It's now Adobe Flash for those of you who don't know, and it's old for Adobe, so might be aging myself there a bit, but that's okay. We also learned databases and Photoshop and Illustrator, which I do use from time to time, but it's for nothing other than silly reasons, so well worth the course, well worth the 2 years. Following that, I decided that I actually don't have a creative bone in my body. I don't know if you can tell by the way I dress. Having said that, I moved to do a laptop technician's job, and what I did was I took phone calls. Yep. But I was called a laptop technician. I did fix laptops. I replaced hard drives, which, you know, super technical stuff there. Got rid of a lot of viruses and spent a lot of time crying because viruses are really whack. And they can, and honestly, we did a lot of warranty repairs too, so I got a lot of mean phone calls. And I thought, well, I'm too much of a fragile petal to deal with this. I'm going to get out of here. So I went and joined a really small company for health and disability as a database administrator, which I was in no way, shape or form qualified for. That's fine. They later promoted me, for some reason, to systems administrator, which I was in no way, shape or form qualified for. But that's fine. For this particular software that they were using, it was an enterprise software for health and disability. I got to know the software so well that I was actually poached by the company who used the software and became a support analyst there in Geelong, which was a trek and a half, because I live in Melbourne. So I became a help desk person, and yet again, people were yelling at me over the phone. This is, in IT help, this is a common occurrence. So after that, I got poached again by a company that used the software. It was actually a council. And I liked my job well enough. However, I was in a room where everything was grey, and the only colour I could find was the red tape I had to cut through to get anything done. I was a business analyst according to the council, but not really, because I did not analyse any business. So really what I was a glorified database administrator again. Later on, I got poached by REA Group as a technical consultant, but not really, because I did no consulting. What I did was I wrangled cloud apps for a living. I basically made sure that our cloud systems, such as Slack, which is a chat tool for those of you who don't know, Box, which is another version of Dropbox, and all those kinds of apps were behaving. And it's very hard to wrangle a cloud app when you have no access to any of the back end of that cloud app. So again, it was a lot of over the phone and crying. This is a theme in my career. Then following that, I decided that job wasn't for me either, and I decided to become a developer, which is where I am today. So a little bit on how I decided to become a developer, which is very germane to my point, so I know this sounds very narcissistic and I'm very sorry. I started off at this awesome program called Rails Girls. Perhaps a few of you have heard of it. It sparked this amazing inspiration in me to just start coding and just doing random things. I was able to create a tangible app in one day. And I thought, that's it, I'm a web developer now, done. I'm gonna make millions, I'm gonna be the next Zuckerberg, except like less creepy. So I couldn't stop coding, so I started building random Rails apps. I built a random Rails app for my dog, and there goes that. For my sister's salon. It didn't work, so she didn't use it. None of this was meant to be used, and if it was, then I'm very sorry. After that, I realized I was getting really stuck. I didn't know where to go, how to customize anything, what to Google. So I went and got myself a mentor. REA has a very, very good mentorship system, so I leveraged that as much as I could. All my mentors were were really, really great men. Yeah. The problem was that every time I got a mentor, they left the company. So I began to wonder, maybe I'm a bit of a jinx. Maybe I'm asking too many questions and they were just sick of me. And they thought, I could just not mentor or I could just leave REA. Like, yeah. So I started to learn object-oriented programming through this mentorship program because I had no idea what it was. The closest I'd come to coding before Rails Girls was making Excel macros. And for any of you who have done that, it is a nightmare, and I don't even know if I would call it coding sometimes. It's more just trying to wrangle Excel to do what you want it to. So I did. I learned object-oriented programming, and this was a massive aha moment for me. An aha moment is an epiphany. And the epiphany was, now I understand what it means to call user new when I'm creating a new user in my apps. I understand why Rails is built the way it is. So I went back to Rails thinking, that's it, I know everything now. Again, I'm always assuming I know everything at this point. I think the most junior people tend to do that, or they tend to go the other way. I just happen to be a little bit more cocky than the other people, but that's fine. So I kept getting stuck again, and it just led to a lot of confusion. Where to go, where to start from, what to Google, who to ask, what do I want to do? Wow. Later on, I was quite fortunate in that REA created something called the Springboard to Tech program, which a few of the people who have done Springboard to Tech are in here today. I think I count 4, not including myself. So it's a really great program that REA's created. Not that I'm advertising REA, but we're pretty cool. So we started a Springboard to Tech program, and they sent us to General Assembly, which is a global, I think it's a technical education system. I'm not really sure if they just do technical, but what I did was I did the Web Development Immersive course, and we went right back to basics. We learnt how to do a loop. We learnt how to do an if statement. And I'm very glad that in my cockiness, I wasn't too egotistical to say, okay, I'm going to empty my cup of knowledge and let them fill it back up again. Because I learned a hell of a lot of things, and it was like a domino effect. I was like, oh my God, I'm an idiot. That's why this does this. And yeah, everything was starting to fall into place. I say everything that I knew of at the time. So that led to slightly less confusion, because I don't think any web developer has ever spent an entire day in their life where they haven't at least been confused once. And that is something I wish I had have been told at the very start. So, for those of you who kind of feel alone in this journey, I compiled a animation with words, I don't know what you call that, video, of what my brain was like before I went to GA. And of course I have animated this in PowerPoint, because why do an advanced diploma of multimedia if you're not just going to animate using PowerPoint anyway? So I hope you enjoy a little brief look into my brain.
Wait, what do you mean object? What's a control
Forms.
404 not found. Like query of
Everyone mocking me on Stack Overflow.
Turboling.
Isn't Chloe script deprecated?
I need a drink.
And drink I did. I was confounded and I didn't know where to start. I didn't know who to ask and where to start. I didn't understand why frameworks such as Rails, and I do apologise, this will be very Ruby-centric, however it can be applied to other languages. I did not know why Rails was built the way it was and why all this magic was working, but when I wanted to fix it, why couldn't I get it to work? There was a lot of whys, just so many damn whys, and I apologise if any of that is spelt wrong. I did just Google it. I do not speak most of those languages. So while I'm there asking why, I'm not sure what to ask. It's just why. And of course, after 3 whys, you've got to have your Delilahs there for any Tom Jones fans. Or is it just me? Yep. Yes! So, finally, I dug into the cockles of my brain and I thought, why could this be happening to me? Rather than, why don't I know things? Why don't I understand what I don't know? And I came up with a really complex math calculation. It's very complex, okay? And I don't expect everyone to be able to follow along. But if you want to ask me questions afterwards, that's absolutely fine. But, you know, I'm pretty proud of it. Okay, so you take one newbie developer, you add a framework, and you get a site. Are you all following along? Is this too complex? Okay. You take another newbie developer and you ask them to customize the website and you get a very angry newbie developer. This is understandable. The root of that newbie developer's anger is just their confusion. They don't know what they don't know. And after I created that mathematical formula, I came up with a caveat, very hilarious / not very hilarious joke. Why was my apps that I was creating on Rails like the Hogwarts Express? Anyone want to venture a guess? No, that's fine. I feel like Dora the Explorer. Sorry. I like it, but my conclusion was because they both somehow magically ran on Rails. Hey! I need like a drum. And because they somehow magically ran on Rails, I was experiencing a lot of trouble with troubleshooting. I was feeling like Hide the Pain Harold, which is this man's name, apparently. I didn't know what to ask. I didn't know how to ask. I looked at the errors and I could not understand what they were saying. I'm like, what does nil class error mean? Why are you telling me that I haven't migrated the database? What is this? And to somebody who understands how Rails works, this is actually quite embarrassingly simple. However, I started with Rails, right? So I had no idea how it worked. I began to wonder if I was alone. I was alone in this situation because so many people on Stack Overflow seem to just be like, oh, it's obvious this is what you've got to do. Or like there would be no documentation inherently in Rails for this kind of thing because it was assumed knowledge. And I was thinking, well, I can't be the only person who doesn't know this, right? So I began to scour the forums of Reddit, of all places. Now, Reddit can be the Mos Eisley of the internet sometimes, a wretched hive of scum and villainy, but sometimes it provides some really good answers to our questions, such as the Rails subreddit. So before I go into this post that I found that really just sang to me, I want to explain briefly for those of you in the room who do not understand models, views, and controllers. So, models, views, and controllers is what Rails works on. You have models, views, controllers, or MVC. Models are the representation of your data in the database. It would be a user, for instance, would be represented by user.new. The name being Leah, the age being 21, and whether or not I'm lying about my age being true, because it's quite obvious I'm 20. So, we then move on to views. Views are the visual layer, what the user sees. They may or may not see data about your models, or they may just see 404 not found. It's just the interaction between the user and your app. Then we have the controllers. The controllers are what manipulate the data and decide what data goes to what view. So for instance, in this one, I'm manipulating the user. I'm saying if the user's age is 21, update them to say they're lying about their age. Just a little visual representation here. You can see with the view, the user takes an action from that view. The controller then decides to update or read the model. The model then notifies the controller of itself, and the controller then updates the view to show the user. So it's a fairly simple when you're talking about it at a very high level walkthrough. However, to somebody who's new to this kind of thing, it isn't that simple. Now, we move on to this post by somebody with my favourite name in the world on Reddit. Username when shit hits hard. I don't know what it hits, and I don't want to know at this point. Please help me understand Rails form and control better. I'm a beginner and I couldn't find a Learn Rails sub, so please forgive me. Sure, we'll forgive him or her. I have scaffolded a post model controller and views using Rails G scaffold post with the fields. For those of you who aren't aware what a scaffold is in Rails, it literally creates everything for you. You tell it, this is what I want my model to have. It creates the controllers, it creates the views, it creates the models. And you have to do essentially one thing: migrate to the database and run your server. So it's a very powerful tool, and I'm not knocking it as a tool, it is very good. However, what we can see is follows. It generates everything for me, and if I navigate to localhost, I can add new posts and all. And I'm having trouble expanding this to other views. Say I want to be able to add the new post from views dashboard index. How do I achieve this? I should be using form 4, but I did use form 4. But I get errors like nil class and no metadata. For anyone who's used Rails, this is actually quite apparent without seeing the code what's going on here. The simple fact is they haven't actually passed their post model to their dashboard controller. Now, I was wondering why, because I would ask the same question when I started Rails as well. Why so many of us were getting these questions and why we weren't able to easily answer them. And then I thought about it a bit harder. It generates everything for me. Well, it kind of makes you think. The great Carl Sagan actually had a saying that I think applies to this. If you wish to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. And I think the same is true of web apps. If you wish to make a web app from scratch, you must invent the universe or your environment. If you want to make it dead from scratch, you first have to write a HTTP server library. You could use one, but that's not technically scratch. And then I thought about it a bit more as to how much using Rails is like baking an apple pie, especially using a scaffold. And I kind of thought, it's not really. It's more like going to the supermarket and buying the apple pie. You haven't made it, but you've given the parameters of what you want. You go to the supermarket and you say, I would like an apple pie. You get an apple pie. So, I did a slight comparison. I have used Sinatra, which is a super light framework in Ruby, and Rails, which is a super large framework in Ruby. Sinatra lets you pick exactly how you're going to model your app. Rails gives you some guidelines, some harsh guidelines on how to assemble your app. So we're going to compare the steps between the two and see how much the difference is. Step 1, and those that are underlined also I should say, are the common steps. Step 1, design my model and data structure. It's very important that no matter what web app you do, you understand that design is a very crucial part of web apps. You can't just, well, you can just go in and just be like, yep, I'm making an app, and then realize, oh, actually I need this, this, and this. So, we design our model and data structure, can't escape that. Then, step number 2, you create a model in the database. For Sinatra. For Rails, you generate a scaffold of your model. So creating a model in the database for Sinatra could be something like creating a database with a table called users with the fields that we had before. And in Rails, it would just be Rails G scaffold users with the fields. Uh-oh, you've noticed that Rails has stopped. Now Sinatra's got to catch up to Rails. So, we now have to connect the database to the app. However we do this is up to us, but we may use a library, for instance, Postgres Gem for Postgres or SQLite, whatever we're going to use. And we need to make sure that our authentication isn't stored in GitHub, and we need to make sure that it's all safe. Then we need to set up some routing. We need our app to say, if we go to leahisawesome.com/users, that we want to see users. So we set that up. Next, we return the data from the database somehow. How do we get this data? Do we just cheat and use the active record gem in Sinatra, which is the gem in Rails that pulls data from the database? Do we do SQL directly to the database? Structured query language, which is the language you use to ask a database for things or update a database. It's up to you, really. I mean, Sinatra doesn't dictate anything at this point. In fact, really ever. Now we set up the forms. So if we want to update a user, we need to set up some forms like you would see if you were entering your name and date of birth and address. We need to set those up so that the user can interact with the data. We then create views. So we need to create a way for our user to see the data. It's no good being able to interact with data if you can't see what happens afterwards. It's just a plain guess, and that's some scary business. So we create the views. We return the views. How do we do that? We tell our controllers that are linked to our routes what views to return and what to look like. We're still not caught up with Rails, by the way, have you noticed? Number 9, we address basic security concerns. Rails has a lot of inbuilt magic, and that includes dealing with security concerns. The main one is something called SQL injection. I don't know if you've heard of it, but basically someone can type their name into a form, but then in the address they might just say, drop all tables from, drop table users. Oh gosh, it's been a while since I've read SQL. So drop table users. Oh, well, suddenly your user's database has been dropped because you forgot to protect yourself against the SQL injection in your form. Rails inherently does this for you. There are ways to do it in Sinatra, but you've got to be wary and you've got to do it yourself. And there are several other security concerns which we won't go into, but it's very important that you do address this. Hey, number 10, we finally got caught up to Rails. Fiddle with CSS, whoop whoop, for all the front-end developers. I personally hate CSS because it hates me. But there we are. We've finally caught up with Rails. And have you noticed that there are 3 times the steps? And when I say 3 times the steps, these steps are nothing trivial. So Rails has automatically connected to your database, set up the routing, set up the views. You can literally, after your scaffold, run your server and have a fully functioning web app. So I don't recommend people do this when they're learning, and I have a few reasons why. You may think when you first start making your app from scratch that you're going to get some sort of potato of a web app or some spaghetti code, and you're probably right. You are. This will happen to you. This is a beautiful, beautiful thing, though. If you remember this episode of The Simpsons correctly, that goes into an art gallery. And I think we should frame all of our failures in an art gallery, to be honest, because we learn by failing. I mean, not on a production website, you know, for a company. I work for REA Group that does realestate.com.au. I'm not just going to go willy-nilly into the front page and be like, oh, whoops, I deleted that. With your own things. Just a caveat in case somebody yells at me later. But you know what? It's a lot of work. I mean, can we all agree that those 10 steps to make 3 are a lot more work than we're probably willing to do sometimes? Yeah, that's fine. What is in it for me? That's a fair question, and I think it's something everybody should ask every time they're asked to do something. Don't just take people at their word, especially junior developers. I find that junior developers are more than happy to just sit there and be like, yes, I will do this. And you should always question things, respectfully, of course. So, You need to know what the benefit is to yourself. Of course, there's a lot of drawbacks, including time and effort. The thing with mature frameworks is they're set in their ways sometimes, and it makes it very hard if you want to use the newest and latest things, or if you want to try doing things a different way. So has anyone here heard of GraphQL? Hands up. Wow, pretty much everyone. Cool. So GraphQL is just a way of returning data from an app. So before I found the GraphQL gem or the documentation for it or anything like that, I wanted to implement GraphQL with one of my Rails apps just for funsies, and I was having a nightmare. It was a nightmare. I thought, I can't do it. I don't know. There's no documentation. But I tried and I failed, and I lived and sorry, cameras back. I lived with this failure and I loved it. I love my failures because my failures mean I've learned something. So, mature frameworks also have paradigms that they don't tend to change because it may break their code, it may just be too much effort, and they tend to have massive flaws that they don't work on. And you know what? We all do, we're human, but frameworks aren't, so yeah. We need to learn by doing, I think. Web development is a very hands-on thing. It's like carpentry to me. You can't teach someone how to hammer a nail by explaining it to them. You need to give them a 2x4 piece of wood and just let them go hell for leather. I still haven't figured out how to hammer a nail without bending it, but that's okay. I rejoice in my failures, and I let my dad do it. So, what we can learn from this is that large frameworks do not allow you to learn by doing because they do everything for you. They're the helicopter mums of the framework world. Now, doing something in Sinatra might seem like a lot of work, but you start to learn why Rails is the way it is, because it's not a bad framework, it isn't. It does a lot of things for you and it's very powerful. But using something like Sinatra starts to let you figure out why things are the way they are, and it gives you a better understanding of the framework. And it gets you to make decisions for yourself as well, and maybe even innovate. Maybe you might create a new framework based on something you developed with a lighter framework. You never know. So, I might just check how much time we have. How much? 15 minutes? Cool. So, in conclusion, I will conclude. We must work hard and meme harder. All the hard work we have in our Sinatra apps or our lighter framework apps is going to pave the way for us to have better understanding for our large frameworks. It's going to pave the way for us to be able to innovate with our own jobs. And it's going to pave the way for us to let other people innovate with our apps as well. So that's all that I've got for you today. Thank you very much. My name is Leah. You can get me on Twitter at LeahPluridon, or you can get me at leaheramo.info. Thank you very much. I'm going to open up the floor to questions.
If you have any questions, I'll come run around if you'd like to. Yeah.
Just because I'm curious, when you said that you learned object-oriented programming, what language did you learn?
Ruby. Yeah. Ruby's great. I think Ruby's a really good language to learn object-oriented programming in because it's very forgiving. That or Java, only because I think Java is very unforgiving, and I think it's good to learn good typing practices with Java. I did a little bit of online using, oh gosh, I can't remember what the name of it was. It was an online course website, which if anybody wants to know, I'll Google it later and then tell you. And I also did learn with my mentors, yes. Yep, and through General Assembly, yeah.
So you did mention mentor and mentorship. I would like to ask, for those who are not working at companies that they don't offer mentorship, what are the other options for a junior developer to find mentors?
Yeah.
Where can they find mentors?
That's a really good question. A lot of meetup.com meetup groups, such as the Ruby meetups and things like that, have a lot of people there that are there to network. They have Ruby hack nights as well. And I'm sure if you went there and networked, you could possibly find a mentor outside of the place you work as well. I'm also happy to mentor people, but I am a junior developer. So if you're super junior, then come see me. Yep. Cool. Oh.
Hey Leah, I'm just wondering if you would recommend any resources for trying to understand Rails better?
Sinatra. No. There's a lot of resources. I find that the best way to do it is through a mentor. Getting someone to walk you through how it works is the best way to do it, because it means you can ask questions that you don't know how to Google. I think it's so important that we understand that Google is a machine and it cannot infer meaning from your words. So asking a human being is probably the best way to do it.